Morning.
Morning.
Lance asked about COVID. I don't really have a whole lot more to share. There are people still dying from COVID. The last numbers I saw were about 4,000 nationwide per week. The majority of those are unvaccinated and or have multiple comorbidities, and what we usually mean by that is age, obesity, diabetes, any other serious health problems, which puts a number of us here in that category. The vaccinations don't fully protect you from getting the COVID, but does protect you against getting real sick and being hospitalized and dying. And so while there are some people that are dying that have been vaccinated, they tend to be ones that have a considerable amount of, in my jargon, comorbidities. It's not 1 + 1 when you add them up, age or say obesity and diabetes. It's an exponential curve going up for risk of death and hospitalization. And so you have one that's not too bad, that's most of us here. I don't see anybody really obese here, but you know, the more you add, those problems, the more likely that you're going to have a bad outcome. I think we're really going to be looking at it being a chronic problem. Yes?
It seems that with this booster, there are many people who are having a strong reaction. They're coming down with cold and flu symptoms.
It's hard to say because right now there's 3 other viruses going through the community. There's a cold, there's a stomach virus, and there's the flu. And so, you know, the odds are good chance that you get the vaccine, you might come down with one of those in the next week or two, and people tend to blame it on the vaccine. I haven't seen any earlier data when they were doing the testing to show that there's any risk. I tend to get a sore arm from the shot. I had the shot fairly recently and didn't react to the flu shot. I got both on the same day, which is something you can do. But there is a cold going around. I actually picked that up when I came back from my trip. There's COVID negative, but definitely had a cold. And there is the flu going around. It's a little early. And I should say there's 4 viruses. There's a stomach virus, but in the kids there is what we call it hand and foot disease, which tends to be very small, and young kids tend to get it, and they get a rash and some shedding of the skin in the hands and the feet. And so there's a bunch of things going around, which is fairly typical this time of year with the schools back. Any questions about COVID? Is there any other questions before we get going? Dear Lord, thank you as always for your blessings. Thank you for the blessings that you give us. Thank you for your word that we can understand your wishes and your instructions on how to live our life. Lord, we are so blessed with all the gifts that you give us. Lord, thank you for all the work that was being done for us to have a church. All the people that put their time and interest and sweat into getting us to be able to have a church. And lead us in your direction and your kingdom so that we can fulfill your mission, that we can go and have disciples throughout the world. Lord, be with Debbie and Al as Al is recovering from a serious injury. Be with them, be with the doctors, give them peace and healing. In your son's name, I pray.
Thank you.
Al, as you probably know, remains in the hospital. The last word I got was a text. Does anybody have any more current word about how Al's doing? Lance, did you have something?
I talked to Debbie last night, and she said that pray for him for his healing from pneumonia. He has pneumonia right now. So, but he's a strong guy, she said. So we can keep him in prayer. the pneumonia part, and then he keeps telling me he wants to go home, so that's a good sign, I think. You know? And, other than that, it's amazing that he's alive. I just think about it. He actually fell. I thought it was a place called Puhi Rock, but they went to Puhi Rock and someone was there, so they drove all the way back and went to South Point.
Oh, they went to South
Yeah,
Point?
so South Point, somewhere where the cliff is very high. Somebody caught a fish and he went down to help that guy get the fish, and then somehow he fell.
Okay, so I thought he was down in Monaco, but that's not where he was?
Yeah, he was in South Point.
Okay, because I know, at least where we thought he fell, I've been down there a number of times, and I don't go out there, because it's just too dangerous. But he fell some other place, and, okay. But still not good that he fell.
Yeah.
Because knowing where that place was, I'm sorry, the digression, was surprised he survived how far that fall would have been. And he would have been down kind of in the water wash, and so I was kind of surprised he survived, but if he fell some other place, then I don't know exactly how the circumstances were. Okay. Dennis, we'll start with 9:5 and finish up this section.
So I thought it
What?
9:5?
Corinthians 2:9:5.
Yeah, Corinthians 2:9:5.
So I thought it necessary to urge the brothers to visit you in advance to finish the arrangements for the generous gift you had promised. They will not be ready for the generous gift, not as one budget to be given.
And so, Paul has been writing most of chapter 8 and all of chapter 9, talking about this collection that he had wanted to collect to take to the poor Jewish Christians in Jerusalem and Judea. And the verses just before that we talked about last week, he was saying that he had sent Titus and 2 unnamed brothers, one probably chosen by the churches that he was with in what is now Turkey, the Romans called Asia, the coastal area of Turkey, Ephesus and some of the other churches there, and another brother that he again didn't name that he probably picked. And these people were with Titus to go back to Corinth to help finish the collection that he was going to take, not only from Corinth, but all the other churches that he had set up. Felt that he didn't name the brothers because they were people that the Corinthians would have known, and they were accompanying the letter back with him, so it wasn't Paul sliding the 2 people, it's just the way he wrote it. But what Paul has been trying to do is to show that this collection was not, as we would say, line Paul's pockets, but to actually go with, initially Paul was planning to have it go with these people without him to Jerusalem. Paul's interest in this it was intense. Some of the discussion by the commentators of why, and I'm kind of reviewing this, was that he felt some obligation in the ancient times and somewhat still in our culture. If somebody gives you a gift, you have an obligation to give something back. In Acts, Paul had gone to Jerusalem and met with the pillar apostles, James and Peter, and got okayed that the way he was doing his ministry to the Gentiles was correct, that they didn't have to be following all the Jewish hygiene and dietary laws, circumcision and dietary restrictions. to become Christian. There was quite a bit of debate at that time about how Jewish the Christians needed to be. And Paul probably felt some obligation because of that. Also, by Paul collecting a donation to them, it would show that his churches are viable and functioning, and there's unity along with his churches that he had set up, but also all the other ones, so there's unity in the Christian world. And by accepting the donation, in which the probably conservative Jewish Christians in Jerusalem, who might have felt the Gentiles joining the church needed to become more Jewish, would show that they accepted Paul's vision of what a Christian needed to do. And so Paul was very interested in this. He spent a lot of time with this. He's in 2 chapters now, so we're kind of wrapping this up. And he wanted to make it clear that it was voluntary and that he was not going to benefit from it directly, and that it was going to be handled correctly. But now he's encouraging them. They had apparently made a pledge that they were going to give a certain amount of money as a church. And as we talked about last time, when you make a pledge, say to United Way, at some point if you don't pony up the money, the people start asking you for it. And so rather than him show up and say, okay, I need the money now, and they haven't done anything, he's sending some people ahead of time to try to make sure that it gets done. And so he says, I thought it necessary to urge brothers to visit you in advance and finish the arrangements. So he's basically telling them, I'm sending these people ahead of me to finish up the arrangements you had. He had instructed them earlier to make a small collection every week to build up for the major collection, and so they didn't have to come up with it all at one time. And it was supposed to be voluntary, not forced, not grudgingly given. Okay, so we finished that section, and we'll go on to why we should be giving. And the next section is 9:6 to 15, and why Corinthians need to give generously. This is now more of a theological discussion of giving, rather than the practical instructions that he had been given up with them. Okay, Lance, 9:6, please.
9 what?
9:6.
9:6, yes. Remember this, whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and whoever sows generously will also reap generously.
So why would somebody sow sparingly? I mean, these were, by and large, agricultural people. It wasn't up until very recently that the majority of the population weren't farmers or did some kind of animal husbandry or something along that line. The majority of people this time, even the ones in the city, had some roots into agriculture. So the idea of sowing agricultural metaphor would resonate with them. So what does a farmer do when he sows? What does that actually mean?
Plant seeds.
How do they do it? What in that time? How would they do it? How do you sow a seed? Yeah, you sow it out. You have a bag.
They throw it away, or
And they
have plows.
Yeah, they tilled the soil depending on exactly what they were doing. Remember, they didn't have corn, so we're talking about wheat or maize, not maize, but barley or something like that. So it'd be small seeds, and so they would till the soil, and have it ready, and the guys would go out there with a bag of seeds that they kept from the year before and toss them, throw them out. And then they usually would cover them up in some way or another so the birds wouldn't get them. But basically they would toss them out. And so I think you can think, if you don't throw out very many seeds, what is your crop going to be like? You're going to be poor. And so they would understand the idea that if you threw out a good number of seeds, your harvest potentially would be a lot better than if you threw out very poor. And so, what does the farmer that's doing the sowing do that willingly or begrudgingly? Is he begrudgingly throwing away his seeds, or is he willingly doing it? Yeah, he's willingly doing it. He's trusting that by being generous with the sowing of his seeds, that he will end up with a generous harvest. And so he's willingly doing this. He saved his seeds. He's willingly doing that. And so he basically often will sow all he can, all that he can save for that purpose. So who does the farmer trust then in his harvest once he sowed the seeds? God. So the farmer trusts God to lead him to having a bountiful harvest. We talked a little bit last about how ancient peoples feel, and we'll do it a little bit more, but the Greeks and the Romans did not have a culture of supporting the poor. And we'll talk somewhat more about that later. But the Jews definitely did. It was an important part of their culture, their relationship to God, to show that their righteousness with God, that they supported the poor, particularly the poor widows. And it was something that they were instructed to do. And so that was something that was quite a bit different than the underlying culture of the Roman Greco time. And so this is why Paul is spending some time going through this, showing that, this is the way we should be. And so the Jewish thought was, if you give generously to the poor, God will bless you. And that's in a number of places in the Old Testament, but generally the Jewish thought was, if you gave to the poor, God would ultimately bless you. Would this blessing be a material blessing? Necessarily. Would it necessarily be a material blessing? No. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you, by giving away things materially, that you will get material things back. Do we sometimes, even in our Christian world, hear that said differently? I think the answer is yes. There are some, in my view, unscrupulous pastors or cults like the one in Moon set up that the Japanese are having trouble with, that basically said, if you give all you have to the church, to me, as a pastor, you're going to materially be benefited. And there's nothing that I see in the Bible that says that. It clearly is that, yes, you might get materially blessed, but what you're really getting blessed is is spiritual. And so run away from any church and saying that you need to give everything you can. It's always everything you, I said that wrong, give everything you have. What you're supposed to do is give what you feel comfortable with, to the church. And don't let anybody tell you differently, because that's not biblical, Does that make any sense to people? It clearly is said it's a cheerful giver, a voluntary giver, and not giving what you can't not survive without. And so the idea of giving everything to a church is not biblical. Okay. And he says it quite clearly. 7, please, Jim.
Each man should give what he has decided in his heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves the cheerful giver.
So this is actually Proverbs 22:8 that he quotes here. For God loves a cheerful giver. And so that is actually Proverbs 22:8. And so what is crucial about giving? Is it the amount that we give crucial, or is there some other aspect that's crucial? Attitude. I got a GT class. That's exactly the word. It's the attitude of what we give. It's not how much we give. It's the attitude that which is crucial. And so he's clearly saying we should give what we decide to give, not somebody telling us that we need to give a certain amount. And it should not be under compulsion or reluctantly. It should be given with some sense of joy, and because God loves a cheerful giver. Lynn, 9:8, please.
I'm sorry, what number was that?
9:8. 9:8.
Okay. And God is able to make all ways abound to you, so that in all things at all times, having all that you need, you will abound in every good work.
So God is generous, and He gives us what we need. As the old Janis Joplin song goes, it doesn't necessarily mean that He's going to give us a Mercedes-Benz because all our friends have Porsches, but He'll give us what we need. And the word in Greek here that they're talking about, it means self-sufficiency or contentment, so that God will make sure that we have enough to be self-sufficient and contented. Doesn't mean that we necessarily will have as much as the neighbor, but we'll have enough that we need. And since we have enough that we need, what does that lead us to? I'm sorry? Contentment. But it also leads us to be able to do good work. That if we have enough, we don't have to be worrying about our daily bread. We have enough, we can then focus on doing some work for the church. As it says, you will abound in every good work, so that by being contented, being self-sufficient, having God's grace, then you can do God's work.
It's the same message Jesus gave to the disciples, that He would meet all our needs.
Exactly.
And then Matthew 6.
So what does it say about hoarding blessings? Should we save them up or not?
me, it tells us that if he's meeting all of our needs, we have no reason not to be faithful.
Right.
To God's instructions for daily living, or the mission that he sent us out to share our faith with other people.
And so yes, we do not hoard our blessings. We should share them. We should pass them on. So what is the purpose, at least in the Christian view, of these blessings? We might say specifically money. Beyond the necessariness that you need to support yourself. What is the purpose of this extra wealth that we have?
Nothing other than pride or
I'm sorry?
nothing other than pride or one up on you.
Yeah, but as a Christian, what should we be using that extra wealth for?
Or spreading it out.
For serving others, exactly. And
Verse 9.
yes. Some people would read ahead. And so we should be using that extra resources, not hoarding them, to help others. Help specifically others in the church, but help others. And by helping each other, the Greek term for that is koinonia. And that means that we have a partnership. There's not one that's lording over us. As a church, it's a partnership. We have we don't have, in a sense, have a person that compulses us or tells us to do. We have a group that, as partners, some can supply a little bit more, some less, some need help, some can help. And so it's a partnership is how it's phrased in Greek. Where do these rewards come from? Where does this wealth, where does all this actually come from? Who supplies us with this? God. So grace and what we have all comes to God, from God. Okay, now Jim has read ahead, but I think it's George's turn to read 9:9. 9:9.
As it is written, he has scattered abroad his gifts to the poor, his righteousness endures forever.
And so this is actually Psalms 11:9 that he's quoting here. And again, it's showing the Jewish tradition of supporting the poor. And he who scatters his gifts to the poor, he who scatters the gifts to the poor, his righteousness endures forever. And so by giving to the poor, it shows that we have a right relationship to God. Where does charity come ultimately from? Where does charity ultimately come from?
From the heart.
From the heart. But who supplies the wherewithal to be able to have charity?
Holy Spirit.
Right, from God. And so, by having the right heart, showing that we have the right relationship with God, then giving to the poor shows our relationship is correct with God. But how do we give to the poor? How should we be doing this? How should we be making our gifts? Well, Jesus tells us how. And so Larry, can you look up Matthew 6:1 to 4? This is Jesus speaking.
6:1 through 4.
Yeah, 6:1 to 4. Matthew 6:1 to 4.
Be careful not to do your acts of righteousness before men, to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets, to be honored by men. I tell you the truth, they have received the reward in full. And when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. And your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you.
And so this is Jesus telling us how we should be giving. And this is why we don't have a poster on the wall saying that Lynn gave this amount of money and Joy gave this amount of money. My wife, as you know, is a treasurer. I have no clue, and she doesn't share with me how much people give. This is the way we think Christ wants us to do this. And so the reward is not supposed to be from us, people. The reward is supposed to be from God. And God knows how much we give and how we give and what way we give. But Jesus is saying that we should not be making this a public spectacle of giving, which apparently some of the Jews at that time did. I gave this to the, and out in front of the congregation. But we don't do that. There's no, gold star givers and bronze star givers and lead star givers or whatever. We don't do that. And we do this because this is our instructions. Does that make sense? The Greeks and the Romans would have had a problem with this. Because remember, their culture was, if I give something to you, I'm expecting something back. And if Jim, I'm going to pick on you, has nothing, he's destitute. But that's the words in Greek, when they say poor, means destitute, not just not having something, having nothing. If Jim has nothing materially, and I give him something, what can I expect back from him? Nothing material. He might praise me for giving to him, but nothing material. And the Greeks thought that that kind of praise was worthless. And the Romans, it's a Greco-Roman world. And so this is something quite foreign to the way that they would have been thinking. If I give something to Lynn, I expect Lynn to give me something back. And that's how they function. We do it somewhat out of courtesy, but it's not something that ingrained in our culture that if I give X amount of dollars worth of something to Lynn, Lynn's going to give at least that back to me at some point, or a favor, something of value. But if Jim has nothing, and I give him something, what can I expect from him? Nothing of any worth. And so this kind of thinking, charity to the poor, was very foreign to them. And if you receive that kind of charity, because all of us, especially in that kind of world, had times of up and down financially. And you received help from the other people in your church when you needed the help. How would that make you feel? And you would think that that would lead to a lot of people joining the churches, which is what happened. The beauty of this is our God's instructions to us to how we should be living.
What I see in verse 11 is that Paul is saying, because in light of the context you just said, the historical context about giving and the expectation, he's saying to them, you will be rich. But that's not, that richness can be a spiritual, richness.
It'd be a spiritual richness.
And so, but that's what he's trying to convey to the Corinthians, yes, there will be a return on your investment, but it's going to be a spiritual reward. But perhaps it's more than a spiritual reward.
Yeah, he's not guaranteeing that we will
Yeah.
get this, but it is definitely spiritual, but sometimes it will be material. And that will lead to a blessing. But where does those blessings come from? They come from God. And I'll finish up with this thought. The other thing about the way the Greco-Romans did about pledges, if I pledge to give to United Way, for example, this amount of money, and I don't come up with it, what happens? They probably send me a letter, maybe a phone call. But the Greeks, if you made a pledge and you didn't come up with it, they actually publicized you in the city square. And so, I'm picking on Jim today. Jim, you said you were going to give $100 and you didn't. And they would actually publicize it. It would be printed up and shamed him for not doing that. And that's how they function. But God is the one that gives us the blessing so that we can have the charity, and it's instructions of how to do that. And the fact that it shows us by doing that we have a right relationship to God. But the money that we give should be for the benefit of all of us, not for the benefit of one person, pastor or somebody. It's for the benefit of all of us. And it should be something that all of us decide how we're going to deal with it, which is what we will be doing in our business meetings. Remember, it's not just the deacons or one person making a decision, it's a corporate decision on these things, how we should deal with God's blessings to us. And I promise, I'm running a little late, I promise to get people out for the early, so Dennis, can you close us with prayer since Larry read last?
Heavenly Father, thank you for this opportunity to learn your word. Both of people every day applying it to your lives. In the way that you wish us to. Praise in your son's precious name.
Thank you. Okay.